When I was growing up, we had a near sacred routine on Sundays in my family. Sunday mornings and Sunday evenings were for church, Sunday school, worship, youth choir, Sunday night Bible study. But Sunday afternoons? Those were for the all-important Sunday afternoon nap. We'd get home from church, eat our sandwiches, and scatter to our separate corners of the house to nap. My dad preferred for this nap to take place in front of whatever sports match was on that day, usually giving up in disappointment when his teams decided winning wasn't something they were going to do that day. As an introvert, I preferred to hide away in my room with my cat and read until I fell asleep. The older I get, the more I realize my parents probably weren't trying to teach my brother and me a profound lesson about the importance of rest. I think they were just trying to get a few hours of peace and quiet. But either way, I eventually began to appreciate the importance of a good Sunday afternoon nap. It's a nap that got me through undergrad, seminary, and many hectic Sundays at both churches I've served. It's a guilt-free time to let my body and my mind rest before diving into another busy week of living. Life can be so exhausting, especially when we live it at a breakneck speed, packing as much as possible into every hour of every day. This pandemic has forced us to slow down a bit over the last year. And last March, before we truly understood what we were in for, I heard many people say they liked living at a slower pace. Now, nearly a year in, we are all exhausted. Parents are exhausted from homeschooling their children while trying to work from home. Teachers are exhausted from having to pivot over and over again, both inside the classroom and in the virtual classroom, without the support and resources they need. Healthcare workers are exhausted, many working longer hours with very little time off and witnessing trauma after trauma on a daily basis. We're tired of being alone, of not being able to see friends or family, of living in fear of the virus, of grieving the loss of so many lives. We're tired of headlines that scream about a new catastrophe every day. We're tired of those who are supposed to lead us arguing while people are losing their homes, their health, and their jobs. We're tired of not understanding what's going on. We're tired, and that's why we need rest, now more than ever. From the very beginning, God showed us that rest was vital for us as individuals and as a community at large. In the first chapter of Genesis, God creates and creates and creates for 6 days. And after God is done creating, God rests. God models the importance of rest in Genesis, but God takes it a step further and bakes rest into the very foundation of the life of God's people. After God liberates Israel from slavery in Egypt, God gives Moses a set of 10 commandments to order the life of the people. The first 3 commandments focus on how the people relate to God. You shall have no other gods, don't make idols, and don't take the Lord's name in vain. The last 6 commandments focus on how the people relate to each other. Honor your parents. Don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, don't covet, don't lie. And in the middle of these 2 sections, we have the 4th commandment, which serves as a bridge between them. But we'll talk more about that in a minute. For now, let's read the 4th commandment in Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15. I'm reading from the Message translation. No working on the Sabbath. Keep it holy, just as God, your God, commanded you. Work 6 days, doing everything you have to do. But the 7th day is a Sabbath, a rest day. No work. Not you, your son, your daughter, your servant, your maid, your ox, your donkey, or any of your animals. And not even the foreigner visiting your town. That way your servants and maids will get the same rest as you. Don't ever forget that you were slaves in Egypt, and God, your God, got you out of there in a powerful show of strength. That's why God, your God, commands you to observe the day of Sabbath rest. Rest. the Sabbath, is so important that God commands Israel to do it. And it seems that God understands that our human nature is to work to the point of exhaustion. So we have to be intentional about making time to rest. The word Sabbath means to stop, to cease. The Sabbath is a day when we intentionally create space by putting aside our work. In ancient Israel, and for many modern Jewish traditions, part of the Sabbath day is dedicated to worship, prayer, and the reading of God's word. Sabbath is not just a day of prayer, though. It's also a day of rest, eating leisurely meals, spending time with loved ones, taking walks, and even napping. It's a day meant to be enjoyed and to provide refreshment and restoration. In the fourth commandment, God gives two reasons why it's so important for Israel to keep the Sabbath. The first reason is that it's a holy day, modeled after God's own day of rest in the creation story. The second reason is that observing the Sabbath ensures that everyone, including society's most vulnerable people, the servants, the foreigners, and the animals, are able to rest as well. God tells Israel to remember that God delivered them from Egypt, where they were slaves who were never allowed to rest from their forced labor. As one commentator writes, God is saying to Israel, "You are not to do as was done to you in Egypt. You are to provide relief for those who do not have the power to secure their own relief." At its core, this Sabbath commandment is about justice and compassion. That's why it's a bridge commandment between the first commandments about relating to God and the last commandments about relating to neighbor. Sabbath rest serves both purposes. It connects us to God and each other. When we honor the Sabbath, when we take the time to rest, everyone benefits, and everyone has the opportunity to thrive. If you continue to read Exodus, Deuteronomy, and Leviticus, I know, my favorite books too, you might get overwhelmed by the number of laws written for Israel to follow. But you'll also notice the way that Sabbath is not limited to one day a week. It grows into a way of life. As another commentator writes, the Sabbath commandment sets out a principle of regular release from the things that enslave, oppress, and bind human life. Some examples in the law are 6 years of sowing the land and a year of letting it lie fallow, releasing slaves every 6 years, canceling people's debts every 7 years, and the honoring of a Jubilee year, in which every 50 years all three of these things happen at once. The point is, God makes it clear that Sabbath is meant to be liberating and refreshing, not just for those who have the financial or social means to observe it, but for all people, including the poor and the oppressed. The invitation to Sabbath rest is a powerful one for us today. In the midst of the chaos and stress of our time, we need to set aside intentional time to rest, to be with God, to be with ourselves, to be with the ones we love. How we observe the Sabbath, how we rest, will look different for each of us. I encourage you to figure out what works for you. What brings you life? What brings you freedom? What refreshes you and makes you feel more connected to God and yourself? What does your body need? What does your soul need? Maybe it's going for a hike or spending a few hours in your backyard. Maybe it's cooking your favorite meal and sharing it with your household. Maybe it's taking a leisurely nap or reading in your favorite chair. Maybe it's watching or even playing a sports game. Whatever it looks like for you, make time each week or each month to take a Sabbath. And if you have children, start teaching them how to rest too. The second invitation of our Sabbath is to love our neighbor. We cannot talk about rest without acknowledging that too many people do not have the privilege of resting. So for those of us who do have that privilege, we need to ask what barriers are keeping other people from rest, and how do we create a world where everyone can rest? I'm thinking about the minimum wage worker who works 70 hours a week just to barely be able to pay their bills. Or our Black neighbors who experience racism and discrimination on a daily basis, never able to escape the distress that comes with that. I'm thinking about the healthcare workers working overtime and begging people to take this pandemic seriously and do their part to stop the spread. Or the people experiencing homelessness, who have to scramble to find their next meal or the next place to sleep at night. Or the gay teen whose parents have kicked them out of the house for being gay. As Black activist and musician Andre Henry says, a new world is possible. It doesn't have to be this way. We can change things. We can follow in Jesus' footsteps and advocate for a world where everyone has what they need to survive, where people don't have to live in fear, and where rest isn't a luxury for a privileged group, but part of the rhythm of life for all people. As Israel showed us, the Sabbath is not just a single day, but a way of living that prioritizes liberation from the things that bind people. This week, I invite you to take a Sabbath. Maybe it's a few hours one morning, or maybe it's a whole day. Maybe it's a Sunday afternoon nap today. Just block off some intentional space to rest, to be restored, to experience God's love and peace. And when you're feeling refreshed, ask yourself, how can I create space for someone else in my life to rest? What's my role in creating this new world? The Sabbath commandment isn't meant to be a burden, another way to fail at being holy if we don't keep it. The Sabbath is meant to be a liberating gift. It's a way for us to reconnect with and experience God. It's a way for us to live out our call to love our neighbors. It's an invitation to a way of living that is so much better for everyone.